You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I hope you had a fantastic holiday season and new year. We are back with new episodes. And as you can see, we have redone a few things. We've got new music, new art, and really excited about where the show is going to go this year. So thank you for coming back and staying with us. Today, I am talking with Jacob Cooper. We are going to be talking about empowering people through grief, spirituality, emotional wellness, and all of that good stuff. Make sure you check out his book, Life After Breath. And we will have all of that information in the show notes, just like always. Just go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Jacob's episode, and all of his contact information and everything will be there for you. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me as an honored guest, Tracy. Really appreciate it.
Well, I am thrilled to have you. And, thank you for being my first guest after the year. This is awesome.
Yeah. And good timing.
Absolutely. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your story because from what I'm reading, you had a near-death experience around age 3, which obviously was very traumatic. So I would really like to, hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I went to a park like a normal day, and going to the park, I suffocated as a result of pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough. And the playground, and I was in the playground, going up on a slide, literally every part of my body at the top of the slide shut down like a power breaker in a home due to the deprivation of oxygen, suffocation. And once I was really able to lose every part of myself in suffocating, I was able to really connect to a breath, not of my body, but a breath of my spirit of my own eternity and the breath of my essence. And so, as traumatic as losing the breath of my body was, I was able to have this profound near-death experience, which allowed me to really go into my essence and surround myself with everything. And I was, able to really encounter a lot of, familiar beings on the other side, as we call it, including my own spiritual guides, angels, soul family members, as well as understanding, previous carnations, their impact in this lifetime, which I chronicle in Life After Breath, as well as, my own life's purpose that I was able to see, within my near-death experience. So it was very profound, but, it's universal in a sense that we all have a purpose behind what we seemingly feel as a small sense of self or our own, individualized and collective pain that we go through, as well as trauma that I experienced, which I don't wish suffocating on anyone. That was, very, very scary and debilitative, but, so yeah.
That had to be absolutely terrifying at such a young age. And to be able to experience that profoundness that you were able to experience, how were you able to process that being 3 years old? I mean, when I was 3, I rode my trike into the pool to see if it would float, How do you process after, life after death and, having a purpose and all of that?
It really reminded me that we're not a chronological age, we're a soul age. We're having this experience in chronological ages within our own personalities, our own temporary identities. But beyond that, is an eternal soul. And so I was able to get past my own temporary identity and experience and have something much greater. But it did lead to a lot of complexions with all the things that I saw as reality. All the things that I put on pedestals, to me, lost, their form. And so it led to a lot of, I would say, resistance, defiance, behavioral patterns, because I wasn't able to be a cog on the wheel. I was able to really see past, some of the issue. But at 3 years old, you're not able to express that, articulate that, It was more something that was going on internally that I couldn't quite process. Now, near-death experiencers for children take around 20 to 30 years, they say, from researchers to really make sense on an outer basis and be able to articulate and process. But I think we have two different realities: the outer reality in which we communicate and express our lives, and the inner reality, which is, the majority of our own lives, that doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily processed or communicated, but doesn't mean that it's still not happening.
It's amazing to me that you actually were able to even remember any of this.
Right.
Being such a young age, as trauma survivors to begin with, a lot of times our memory is shoddy at best. And being 3, when most of us don't have any memories, or very few memories, to be able to remember something like this and carry it with you as you grow, is incredible.
Yeah, it speaks to me to trauma. I think trauma could go either way, where there's disassociation, like you said, and you bury it, suppress, repress the experience, or it's so heightened, that you hold on to it. And, you think of like global traumatic events such as 9/11, or, stuff like that. You ask someone, what were you doing on 9/11? They'll be able to tell you, what they were doing, but you ask them what you're doing 9/15, 9/16, they would have no clue. And so such profound events have the ability to have retention. But I also view this experience as not something that was produced or happened through my linear mind, as my brain was deprived of suffocation. And so this experience happened from a place beyond my own brain. And it just defies conventional reality because it wasn't produced, by my own brain. And I view the brain is just the ultimate filter of life, but it happened at a such greater, more heightened reality. So I do feel that's how I was able to experience it. But it does speak to universal parallels where, at times kids have a very strong memory where they're able to, remember past lives from thousands of years ago, or their experience in life between lives on the other side. So, memory doesn't have any time frame when you're dealing with a higher gear, a higher framework of where you're coming from. But I think it can have a limitation when it happens from, the brain, and stuff, and it's processed through the linear brain and the linear mind.
Sure. Do you think maybe, I am a firm believer that a lot of times life happens to us for a reason. I went through my traumas, I think, and all the learning experiences that I have gone through so that I can be doing what I am today. Do you think that maybe this happened to you so you could kind of get that spiritual download and, fulfill your life's purpose, your life's mission?
Yeah, I think if we just solely hold on to experiences, they have a certain value to ourselves, but if we're able to find ways to integrate into the world and to make a ripple effect with those around us, there's a lot more weight, there's a lot more capital to this. So I think individually on a micro and macro level, this had a purpose. And, I think being a gentle reminder to people that we're much more than our bodies, we are nonlinear, eternal beings that can never die. We have continuity is an incredibly profound message. That's one of the biggest questions that people have to ask is, what happens when we die? And from that information, what type of universe am I living in? Is it a universe that judges us? Is a universe that forgives us? And being familiar, with that will allow people to develop a more greater understanding of their purpose and to get more into a groove, of life itself. But I think for me, on a personal basis, the near-death experience had definite reasons from, a standpoint of the soul. Within my near-death experience, I experienced a past life that I speak about, in life after breath, in which I committed suicide, in which was my last carnation, which evidential psychics, intuitives have been able to pick up on prior to me, getting public. And so, I think the near-death experience speaks to not only suicide for myself, but to recognize that what's inside of us is infinitely greater than the challenges that are in front of us. And so I think it's a versatile reminder that we have a lot more inside of us than we could ever imagine, that we're capable of handling, and managing and finding meaning and purpose and growth past our own challenges.
Wow, that is, to know about some of your past lives, to me, that is just cool. It's so,
Right.
it just interesting. And I think that stems from, my teenage years when I'm going to get here. I was playing with the Ouija board. And, from that Ouija board, I was in communication with a spirit who was my daughter from my previous life. And
Wow.
apparently, I think if I remember correctly, I had died giving birth to her. And she died around age 3 when her father strangled her. And I firmly believe that spirit, her name was Ada, I firmly believe that she is my oldest daughter today. It's just really fascinating. It's just one of those things that, really, really intrigues me. So, okay, so you're 3 years old, you're playing on the slide. All of a sudden, you're suffocating, you can't breathe. We heard what happened to you spiritually. What happened to you physically?
Yeah, as a result of whooping cough, I just began suffocating, and it's almost like, you're in a basement, you're at a power breaker in your home, and you just shut off every unit. And so for me, that was happening to me on a physical basis, or every part of my body, due to the deprivation of oxygen, wasn't functioning properly. And so for myself, it was to me the most traumatic experience I've ever had in my lifetime, because the breath is not something that we think about. We just do. And it, unless you're on a ventilator, it keeps us living. Breath is life, right? And
Right.
so to have that taken from me put me in a very weird place where I wasn't in my body. I wasn't crossed over. I was just in this place of kind of like eternal uncertainty, trauma, um, just intense fear that I was experiencing. And near-death experiences are very much glorified many times, and people focus on the good things, and a lot of people want to have them. But to go through that intense trauma is something that I don't wish on anyone. And so, from what I learned is death doesn't scare me, but the actual temporary process, of it could be could be quite traumatic and difficult, because you
Sure.
lose control over your bodily functions and things that we don't even, think about, that keep us alive, that we take for granted. And so I was just in this weird incubational place that felt like eternal suffering. And if you're in a car and your engine's not working, you get out of the engine, and you get out of the car rather to check your engine. So that's what happened to me, where I had a form and I was in a disembodied state, and I was able to get out of my car, get out of my engine, um, check all the parts out, and I was able to have a lot more awareness of my neurophysiological state and different parts of functionality. I think it's true. They say we use a very limited portion of our own brains within our lifetime, and certainly I experienced that, where I didn't go to medical school or have any neuro scientific training, but I was able to have a lot more of an awareness of different, bio-neural understanding. And once my brain was suffocating, it literally felt like a plug was in a wall and it snapped in half, and that plug was yanked out, and my brain literally cracked. Felt like it cracked open, and that's when the spirit realm and God came in. And it just showed me the powerful component of the brain as not the producer of life, but rather the filter of life, between the higher realm and this earth realm.
Do you know how long, this transpired on the physical plane? Was it just a couple of minutes? Was it,
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I know the ambulances came, they took me to the hospital.
yeah.
I the frustrating part was the suffocation didn't stop at suffocation. The suffocation lasted for nearly 20 years, in a sense that I had this experience that I kept very close to my heart. It was
Sure.
so sacred. I didn't even bother to have words because words to me were so limiting. And so the suffocating feeling of having this experience and feeling very isolated at it and not even able, not, well, it was just wasn't worthy to talk about it. And it wasn't until I read a book by Betty Eadie called Embraced by the Light, in which I was able to have an understanding that someone else had a near-death experience and more of a
Mm.
universal understanding and lexicon behind it, which was a double-edged sword because on one hand, I felt like Harry Potter and just so special. And on the other hand, someone else had it. So yes, there was universality, but also I'm like, all right, so I'm not, other people had this. I'm not that special. So it was interesting. But people were calling my name, and I speak about this in Life After Breath, and I was trying to speak to them. I was trying to shake them, but they were looking at my body and not looking at who I was. And I felt as a child that didn't stop. People were looking at what they wanted to see or what they saw and not the real me. And so I think being a child, we're looked at as this blank canvas, but beyond that, we're not our bodies. Our bodies are a filter, but they don't produce who we are. They just temporarily store an eternal brilliant soul having a human experience.
Right. So, so physically though, after this, you were okay. Like you didn't suffer any, any real major setbacks from oxygen deprivation or.
Mm. Well, it was funny. I mean, after this experience, surrounding events of this experience, I remember, and I think that's common with trauma, where I don't remember anything from almost preschool outside of spiritual transformative experiences, which I
Okay.
think, again, which lead me to believe that I'm able to retain these because they come from a much heightened vantage point. But, my brain was very much changed where I was able to really connect to a thin, kind of light that was going through my brain. And I was able to just really cross over on a regular basis during preschool, and I had a lot of heightened interdimensional communication. But it wasn't until I looked at a classmate and was having spirit communication, and the classmate looked at me funny, as if I was from Mars, where again that experience of feeling very alone and being in this world and feeling alone within my own suffering led to a continual feeling of deprived of oxygen, as if I was just in my own little planet and everyone else was on another realm. And it was very isolating again
Yeah.
to have that experience on a, you know, so, but, my mother told me that I had some scarring with my vocal cords. I had to go in a nebulizer, for several weeks. I had, some asthma from it.
Yes.
My voice, was impacted by the whooping cough, and it took a couple of weeks to really recover and get my strength back.
Oh, sure. Sure. So, now today you help people, you empower people, you want to remind them that, the breath of eternity is inside of them. So for those that are listening who have gone through trauma, whatever it may be,
Mm.
and, maybe need that reminder or, need that glimmer of hope to hold on to, what message do you have for them?
A simple message that we could experience turbulence, but in the long run, our soul, our spirit, from a much higher standpoint, can never die and can never really truly experience pain. We are infinite spiritual beings with love and brilliance and wisdom inside of us and all around us, unlimited. And I think that's one of the mistakes that people forget is how powerful the love inside of them and all around them truly is. And so I think we're finding ways to transform our lives, which just means to change form, the shape of it. And so I think so much of life isn't so much what happens to us, but rather what we're able to really create from it. And I think trauma work is
Mm-hmm.
that in a nutshell. And the lives that we live are very much that in a nutshell, where we could continually identify ourselves by our karma or our story, or find ways to transform that into our dharma, our purpose, our meaning. And I think the work as a psychotherapist and the work that I do allows people to really be their own authors of their own lives and to really redefine narratives to find meaning and purpose and growth, um, and looking at it from a much deeper vantage point.
Oh, absolutely. The last podcast episode before we went on break, we talked about how to make your mess your message. And
That's right.
I
I like that
completely,
one.
I love it. I completely believe that, life is what you make of it. And, yes, life happens to us. And we have choices. We can either, go down a bad path, or we can, take it and turn it into something good. And it just really is a matter of the choices that you make. And I love that you talk about that we are the author of our own stories, because I believe we absolutely are.
Yeah, but we're not taught that. I mean, from a very young
Oh,
age,
no.
when we think about it, we're so dependent on just a physical basis on adults. And so that leads to, and even in our society, we're dependent on external forces to govern our lives. And so I love what Wayne Dyer would say, who I really follow closely, is problems are found outside of ourselves when we're facing that way. And I think it's important to be cognizant of the direction that we're facing within our lives, that every problem has a solution. The solution is not really found usually on the outside, but within. And so we have to be cognizant of the direction that we're facing within our lives. And, I think the world outside of us is very much out of our control. And so I think if we live from the outside in, the outside governing our inner experiences, then we get very disempowered. If we're able to live from the inside of ourselves, engaging with external forces, we have a lot more of a deeper, more foundational vantage point to really live our lives by.
Absolutely. Well, Jacob, I definitely want to talk a little bit about your book before we end our conversation.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about Life After Breath.
Yeah. Life After Breath, I think the title speaks to what I view as a global near-death experience, where I had my experience at a young age, but I saw, globally in the last 2-3 years, people either literally or metaphorically were suffocated in their own way. And there was a parallel experience. And so for me, what saved me during moments of suffocation was the breath of eternity, which I call inspiration, which simply means to be inspired, means to be in spirit. And that really saved me from really able to surrendering myself to a greater power. And I know that's really hammered down in principles of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, the power of surrender. But the hope of this book is to really not tell anyone things that people don't really know, but to just be a gentle reminder and to let go of some amnesia of what some things that people forgot. And it really is meant to inspire people to really, like we said, to allow them to entrust that the breath of spirit can never die, and that there's a greater gear to live from our life than just the external world. And this life is definitely a guided life, and it's definitely within purpose, and it's not just made to have suffering through experiences, that there's a meaning and a purpose and a greater intelligence governing our lives.
Well, it sounds like an amazing read. I can't wait to dive in. That's for sure.
Thank you. Yeah. And the book isn't, it's about my near-death experience, but also and again, if from a psychological standpoint, it's very different than a lot of near-death experience because it happened for such a young age. But it also speaks to the universality where we are eternal beings having this human experience. And some people have a little bit more recollection of the eternal beings. Some people forget. But I think really life is really about remembering who you truly are and letting go of how you're not. And sometimes in order to be able to do that, you have to be willing to let go of the temporary identity to really open yourself up to a bigger reality at hand. And certainly that happened within my NDE, where I was able to lose who I thought I was and what I was connected to, as my body is just temporary, to really open up myself to a greater reality of who I truly was and what we are all connected to.
That's amazing. Well, Jacob, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today and sharing about your past. This has been very, very fascinating for me, and I'm sure for our listeners as well.
You're welcome. Thank you for all your work. Keep up the great work. An honor to be your guest.
Absolutely.
Thank
Excuse me. Absolutely. Listeners, like I said before, you can get all of Jacob's information over on our website, releasingtraumapodcast.com. Just pull up Jacob's episode. I will have the link to his website, which is jacoblcooper.com, as well as his social media, his book, everything there for you in one neat, nice little spot. So thank you again, Jacob, for coming on. And listeners, thank you so much for joining us in the new year. And we'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.